Welcome to Real Foot Forward, a West Tennessee podcast from Discovery Park of America in Union City, Tennessee. Today's episode is brought to you by First Choice Farm and Lawn.
Thank you, Zach, and welcome everybody to Real Foot Forward, a West Tennessee podcast where we explore the history, the people, and the culture of our home in West Tennessee. I'm your host, Scott Williams. Okay, Zach, you sound a lot better than you did the last couple episodes. Did you have COVID?
I did have COVID, so I hope I didn't give it to the teacher at my son's school.
I hope you didn't, but you sound a lot better now. You sounded terrible one couple of episodes ago. Well, I'm glad you look great. You look like you're feeling good.
Oh, yeah.
What is something you discovered this week at Discovery Park of America?
So this past Sunday, on my day off, I brought the kids to Discovery Park, and we went outside in the Children's Discovery Center, and they started looking around for bugs, and they kept running back to these signs that we have out there that if it wasn't for them, I would not have known we had. It says there's two signs out there. One says, "Can you find these critters?" One says, "Can you find these fossils?" And children and even adults can run all over the playground out there looking for these different critters and fossils. Pretty cool.
It took me a while to find that as well. That's one of those things here that's fun for children and adults.
Oh, yeah.
So our guest today is Dr. Stephen McBride. He's the Director of Career Development at the University of Tennessee Southern. I'm so used to saying the University of Tennessee at Martin, so I gotta retrain myself. Welcome, Dr. McBride.
Hey, glad to be here. Thanks so much for your time today.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a lot to talk about today about leadership and ag, and you've got a fascinating academic career and history, but also we want to find out a little bit more about you personally. So rewind the clock all the way back and take us back to little Stephen McBride and tell me where you grew up.
I was born in Lebanon, right east of Nashville, Tennessee. My dad worked for Farm Bureau Insurance for his entire career there, and he moved around a little bit. And when I was a year old, so I don't really remember Lebanon too much firsthand, as much as my older brothers do, he became the agency manager in Madison County. So I did all my growing up for the most part there in Jackson, Tennessee. So I'm a West Tennessee boy. My dad was his whole family for the last over 100 years, they were in Paris, Tennessee, so over in Henry County. So I consider myself to have deep West Tennessee roots.
So you were growing up in Jackson when you were little. How many brothers and sisters did you have?
Two older brothers that are 5 and 7 years older than me.
Okay, great. And what did your parents do for a living?
Yeah, so my mom was she was from the state of Iowa originally, and she wanted to become a 4-H agent, and she went to Iowa State University, majored in home economics to become a 4-H agent in Iowa. And at the time when she graduated, there weren't any openings across the state of Iowa for anybody that was brand new. It was more ladder climbing opportunities. So she was going to need to go get some experience under her belt, and she had an experience.
Was that let's see, I'm trying to think. As you will discover as you get older, the older that you get, the more the past seems like it was in the 1930s, but in fact it must have been in the 80s, I'm guessing. Were there more men in that field than women at the time, and she was sort of a trailblazer?
It was a little bit, some of that. So for instance, her older brother had gotten to do a lot in the National FFA organization in Iowa and was their first ever state star in agribusiness through a really cool business that he ran. And she, just a couple years younger than him, never got to be an FFA because girls were not in FFA at that time until right around the time that she was graduating from high school is when they opened that up. So she missed out on FFA.
What era? What era?
So yeah, she was in the late 60s is when she was starting high school, and then she finished up high school and graduated, I believe it was 1973. And then in 1977, graduated from Iowa State University. So late 70s.
So she was truly a trailblazer.
She really was.
What's her name?
So her name was Carol Henry, and Carol Henry McBride is her married name.
Okay, very cool. And that's great. And
yeah, she came to Tennessee through that to be a 4-H agent in Bedford County.
Now,
what brought her here?
What was her child? How did she grow up? What were your grandparents farmers?
Yeah, so my family has been in Iowa on the same land for more than 150 years now. So the Henry side of my family is still there. She's the second of 4 children. Her siblings, my cousins, everybody is still living on or near the farm. My youngest cousin is farming pretty much full time with my uncle. And my aunt she married into another farm in the community as well. So that's what they're doing up there in Iowa, 15 miles south of Des Moines in Indianola, Iowa. And so her plan was always to come back. But she met my dad when she was a 4-H agent, and he was working for the Department of Agriculture in Tennessee at the time. And then a few years later, after they were married, is when he left the Department of Agriculture to work at Farm Bureau Insurance. And then she stayed home with us boys for the rest of our childhood while my dad worked at Farm Bureau.
So your mom was growing up. What kind of agriculture or was her family doing?
They were a little bit of everything. So they had a lot of row crops. So a lot of the land that they had was in corn and wheat and soybeans. And then they had a registered Black Angus cattle operation. And then they also raised hogs and had a few other side projects as well for different 4-H things that she and her siblings were doing. But that's really what they do even till today, is raising cattle and hogs and doing some row crops there on that same land that has been going strong for over 150 years.
So she was a 4-H agent, and she moves to, or what did she become? 4-H agent? Is that what you said?
Yeah, so she became a 4-H agent in the state of Tennessee with the intention always of going back.
She starts doing 4-H things, and then she runs across. Now, let's stop for a minute and let's go to your dad. Where did your dad grow up?
So he grew up in Henry County, there right outside of Paris in a small community called Henry. And it's pretty silly. So I mentioned that my mom's name was Carol Henry, and my dad was born on a house that was right on the county line of the Carroll Henry line. And so it's just kind of silly when you think about it, Carroll County and Henry County, Tennessee, that he'd find some girl from Iowa that he introduced his family to that her name was Carol Henry.
Did they name any of their kids Henry?
So that was the funny thing. My oldest brother, Matthew, his middle name is Henry, which is supposed to be from my mom's maiden name. But my dad loves the joke when he's back in Iowa visiting my family up there to say, it's so kind of her to let me name my son after my hometown. How sweet was that?
So that's silly thing. So my family grew up in Haywood County. And when I saw your name earlier, when we started working on scheduling this, it made me laugh because my mother tells the story so they were growing up in Haywood County, and when my mother was a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, so it must have been like in the early 40s. There was a family member named Elsie McBride, is the way they say it, in Haywood County, Elsie McBride. And she was at the tuberculosis hospital in Memphis, and the family was going to go visit her, and my mom didn't get to go because she was sick. And so it was, when you ask my mom, what is the most disappointing thing that you ever experienced? She oftentimes says the time that everybody in the family got to go to Memphis to visit Elsie McBride, and she had to stay home and didn't get to go. So the McBride,
there you go.
So I don't know if you had any relatives in Haywood County, but anyway, so that's part of our family.
That's really
so
cool.
So your parents met? Did they have like a meet cute? Like,
yeah. So the way that I hear it, so my mom working with 4-Hers at different competitions. We had the state chicken barbecue contest. So basically learning more about different cuts of meat and also how to prepare them. So helping students with life skills. So she was coaching up her team at the state fair chicken barbecue contest. And my dad, working for the Department of Agriculture at the time, was a lot of county relations work that he was doing with the Commissioner of Agriculture. So some of the things was getting some face time in different competitions across the state and supporting them through the Department of Agriculture. And so it was, the way I hear it, it was at that chicken barbecue contest with those 4-Hers that my mom was coaching up, that my dad was there representing the Department of Ag, and that's how they met. And then they had some mutual friends that encouraged them to take it a step further. And I'm glad they did, because if it wasn't for that, then my brothers and I wouldn't have gotten the really cool childhood that we've gotten to be blessed with, and all the rest is history.
Now, that would have been, I'm guessing, in the early 70s, maybe?
So at this point, that would have been right there in the early 80s. So my mom had been a 4-H agent for a number of years in Bedford County at that point. So then my dad, he actually, a unique story about our past. I mentioned Grant Somm was my state FFA officer teammate. And I know that you had him on the podcast as well a while back. So that was cool to see him and all the things that he's doing now. But my dad had been a state FFA president in 1980-81, and my oldest brother, Matthew, was the state FFA president in 2006, 2007. And then when I served in 2012, 2013, we were the first father and two brothers that got to do something really cool like that and representing the thousands of members in FFA across our state of Tennessee. So that was pretty unique.
So this might be a good time. We just had our gala here at Discovery Park, and the host I worked with at the museum, and she and I were talking about, she said that she was really hopeful when she knew she was coming to here that she would be able to see some of those people that wear the heavy blue jackets with the gold writing on them, and so I know those are FFA jackets, right?
You got it.
So for people like myself and Sonia who, have never been a part of any kind of ag program, why don't you just sort of give us the 60,000 feet version of what is FFA?
Hey, that's such a great question. And it also ties into a little bit of what I'm doing here at UT Southern and what really brought me away from Purdue University to join UT Southern as well. Where we're located over here is around 13 of some of our most agricultural heavy counties in the state of Tennessee. And since we have joined the UT system, we have not yet had any true agriculture majors and ways to connect students from an agriculture background on our campus. So that's one of my goals and my vision here on campus, is to find an outlet to connect students. So I have to answer this question often, is why agriculture and what in the world even is FFA? Why should we encourage participation in 4-H? And so for that 60,000 foot view, I would say this is an opportunity to promote leadership development among our nation's youth age 12 to 21. And there's nearly 1 million members of FFA right now, and it'll cross over that very soon. And as we think about all across the nation, each of our 50 states has an FFA association, and the state of Tennessee is one of the largest in the nation now. And the way that we have that growth is to show that these students that are coming through, whether or not they have an agricultural background, are learning and engaging in agricultural communications and getting hands-on agricultural experiences through FFA that are helping them to even just help the general community understand where their food comes from, understand different policy issues that come available about our food supply, about all of the connections that we have in agriculture. 1 out of every 12 U.S. jobs is related to agriculture in some ways, in 300 plus different career fields. So it's not just farms and plowing fields and raising cattle. It's so much more than that. It's about animal byproducts, about the things that you consume on a daily basis. It's about medicines and other pharmaceuticals, all the things that tie into animals in livestock, in crop production, even viticulture. These come together. And that's why I think the Discovery Park is really cool, because there's so much there just in Union City and West Tennessee to show the general public, like, hey, all this cool stuff that you see, especially the stuff outside as well, has a connection with agriculture that may be different than what you assumed about agriculture before you joined us here. So yeah, that's my 60,000 foot view.
Well, of course, like all of us that are, that aren't farmers or working in the you don't have to just be a farmer to work in agriculture. There are hundreds of jobs, if not thousands of jobs in agriculture. But those of us that don't work in it, oftentimes think that food comes out of a bin at the grocery store. No one really understands the complexity, the business of agriculture, which is really fascinating to me. And for those listening who are curious about history, I did look just now, and there's a fascinating timeline on the FFA.org website that has some really cool photos of the early days in like the 1917, and I love history and I love old historic photos, so there's a really interesting timeline that I encourage folks to check out. Zach, we can put that in the show notes so that people can.
And that's a cool thing about West Tennessee as well, is in West Tennessee at the E.W. Grove School in Henry County, that was the very first agriculture school program in the entire nation. They were teaching agricultural classes at that school for many years, helping students in West Tennessee that would have not continued on with their education. So let's go back over 100 years before 1917. Young boys, especially that are growing up on a farm, would maybe go through about 8th grade if they even get that far, and then not see the value in continuing on with their education because they're going to go back to the farm anyway. And so they would drop out and go to the farm instead of finishing out with their schooling. Around that time, they had a vision at that high school there in Henry County of what if we help these students engage with agriculture and learn best practices, promote better efficiency, higher yield, giving them a better understanding of agriculture that can turn into profits on their operation, and encourage them to continue with their schooling. We'll work with them on things. So we will start school a little bit later in the year so that they can get through the harvest season. We'll have some different breaks for planting in the spring, but we want the students to engage with agriculture and continue their education. And so that was a model that was used. And when we were trying to look at that as a nation, we used that chapter as an example. And then the Tennessee Association came about, and a lot of other state associations were popping up across the nation. And then they decided to form at the American Royal Livestock Exposition in Kansas City, Missouri, the first national organization. So it's a little bit interesting history, but Tennessee, and especially West Tennessee, has a deep connection to that.
Yeah, back in the 1930s, my grandfather and grandmother won some kind of big award as farmers. I need to go back and look at that, but I've got all the newspaper articles and photos because, they were just simple folk, in Haywood County, and both of their great grandparents had migrated to Haywood County, settled there, and then they were, farmers, for generations, and they won some kind of award. They got to go to Memphis to the Peabody with other people in other Tennessee counties who had won awards. It was a big deal.
That's really cool
for them at the time. So I've got all the newspaper articles and the photographs of them. Like the front page of the Commercial Appeal has all of the people sitting at the dinner, and you can see my grandparents, and my mother was just a little girl, and my uncle was little, and so it's really it was a big deal for our family. I'm sure back then. But anyway, yeah, it's fascinating to me how the culture of agriculture is interwoven within our society here in Tennessee. No matter what you do or where you work, agriculture really does touch everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you were growing up, you got to grow up in Middle Tennessee. And so obviously, I'm just curious. I was growing up at the time in Texas. Wonder what not at the time, sorry, many decades earlier, I was growing up. So I wonder, in the middle of Texas, there's not as much agriculture. You growing up around an agriculture mom, and was your mom still in agriculture at the time, or did she stop working?
Yeah, so she stopped working once my brother Andrew was born, the middle son. So then she stayed at home with us to make sure that we had everything going. And Lord have mercy, a lot of work being a stay-at-home mom. So kudos to any and all that do that. But yeah, so she stayed at home, and then my dad, he was working at the Farm Bureau office as their agency manager in West Tennessee and Jackson. But we had a farm, so it was important to them with their agricultural backgrounds that their sons be raised on a farm. So we purchased a small tract of land in West Tennessee, and then grew that a little bit into Henderson County. And then it's become a full blown operation in Middle Tennessee now. So now both of my brothers have moved to Manchester as well. My brother Matthew has a animal harvesting facility that is a kind way of saying slaughterhouse in around Chattanooga and South Pittsburgh. That is one of the largest in the region for servicing Tennessee, Georgia, and Alabama for those farmers' needs at a USDA certified facility. And then my family's agricultural operation is McBride Angus Farms in Coffee County, and have more than 250 mama cows and all their babies and all the ones that we'll sell. And coming up in a few weeks, we'll have our annual sale in April.
So you were growing up, what there obviously was probably an FFA in your high school, and you pursued that. Um, Here's a completely ignorant question, probably, but I always want to ask people who have leadership positions this question. Why don't y'all come up with a thinner kind of jacket for folks to wear in the summertime? At the museum, those kids would come, they would just literally be drenched in sweat, and yet they're having to wear this big, thick, heavy jacket. And I used to always ask the teachers, they should make an alternative for summer. Does that ever get brought up?
That's such a great question, and I've got several stories to tell, so I'll only pick a couple here. But one of my first FFA events, I got to room in Washington, D.C. With a few different states, so students from other states as well. And one of the guys that we shared that with was from Ohio, from the same chapter that back in 1930 invented the FFA jacket and showed up at convention with that, and it was later adopted. And so kind of interesting to see the history of the jacket. But, you know, in a lot of things that we do as a society, we have to remember that we have a past to uphold and a future to mold. And remembering where we were back in the day and some of the visualizations, because, you know, even though they're hot and sweaty in the summertime, you still recognize them. You know, that's a little bit different than if they all showed up in a polo, a little bit different if they showed up in something not quite so traditional as that. And yeah, maybe it's a little uncomfortable, but it's a little bit about a rite of passage in your official dress. And when you interview different members from across the nation, like I got to do when I was a national officer, I spent 300 nights in hotel rooms, saw 35 different states. At the time, even spent 10 days in Japan with the Future Farmers of Japan, wearing my official dress in that thick corduroy jacket. And it's the visualization. It's being able to see what you're all about, but also that point of pride and what that jacket represents and all the symbols that are on it. But the story that I wanted to tell was when I was a national FFA officer, we got to lay a wreath, which is a really beautiful ceremony at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in Washington, D.C. in July of 2015. Hot and sweaty out there, going through this whole very slow, very honorific ceremony of laying the wreath. There's so much that you do with the Marines there to prep for it and then go practice it and then actually do it during the real ceremony. All outside, all out in the hot and sweaty. All the members that are there are in their official dress with those thick blue corduroy jackets. But what was kind of neat for me at that point was we were going through in a very silent ceremony with those U.S. Marine Corps guys that were leading the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier march. And, you know, they were sweaty. You could see it just running down their head. And they'll wear that outside in the blistering hot and the snow and the hurricane force winds, anything. And it just kind of neat because as much as I wanted to complain, I was seeing them in that same regard. And I was like, you know, it's kind of similar. They could wear something different that was maybe a little bit more comfortable. They could change a little bit of that, but it's almost also what it represents and the reverence that they have for the office that they hold and for the events that they get to be a part of. So that was a neat, eye-opening experience for me, even though I definitely had to go and cool off after that.
Yeah, and it is cool that the names of the states are on them. So at the museum, I used to always seek out the Tennessee folks, and I would always try to take a picture with those that were from Tennessee because, you know, you have affiliations with your own hometown. So did you ever at any point while you were in high school and you were involved, did you ever think what I really want to do is tap dance? Or or did you just always know from the very beginning what you were going to do?
I'd like to think that maybe my brothers wanted to tap dance. But no, being the youngest sibling, some of my very first memories, my dad was on the FFA Foundation for some time during my early childhood in Tennessee, representing those members. He helped out with different events at the state FFA convention in Gatlinburg every year. So I grew up around it. There were so many memories that I had with it that it never really occurred to me that I should want to do anything else, because that was my passion and it's what I really wanted to do. And there were so many things that I did that my dad and brothers never even explored. But for what it's worth, my brother Andrew, he wasn't as interested in pursuing agriculture like we were.
He's the middle brother?
And he's the middle brother, typical middle child, but in a really cool way. Andrew has such a talent for music, and he actually lived in California for some time, playing big venues like the Whiskey A Go-Go and other festivals out there, was on the radio out in California before moving back once he started a family to Tennessee. But just kind of cool to see that he still got to pursue that without having to have that weird family pressure that people assume that we had growing up. It was all just a personal choice. My parents would not have cared if we didn't pursue 4-H or FFA, but they wanted us to at least be exposed to it and see what it was if it did interest us. And, for me and my oldest brother, it was right up our alley of stuff that really spoke to our passion and goals. Whereas my middle brother, Andrew, it wasn't as much, but he still participated as much as he wanted to in different things. And some of the experiences that he had participating in the talent competition at FFA and playing on the stage at convention helped him to have a little bit more confidence as he was leading concert halls all across the nation as well.
So you have a fascinating education background. So you went to college at UT Martin, which was great. You got a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture Business, Farm and Ranch Management. So that makes a lot of sense. Then you went and got your Master's of Science in Agriculture Leadership, Education, and Communications at the University of Tennessee at Knoxville. Then from Purdue University, you got your Doctorate of Philosophy in Agricultural Sciences, Education, and Communication. Did I get all that right?
You nailed it. Good job. That's a mouthful.
So you got quite the resume. Obviously, you pursued what your parents, were into and what your family, embraced. But at the same time, you definitely put a major business communication slant on it and really pursued it in a different way. So you applied what that with all of this. So what's the importance to you of the education component? Obviously you could have just started working,
Absolutely. And I think that's so true to so many students. And that's how I try to mentor them in my position at UT Southern constantly is we got to do some self-reflection, seeing who we are, what makes us tick, what we would like to wake up to every day and get to do with energy, passion, and excitement. And for me, I had several opportunities to do different things and connected and rubbed shoulders with all kinds of folks and fancy Fortune 500 boardrooms all the way through rural areas in the United States with tons of opportunities. But as I thought about what I wanted to do, it was more where I wanted to be. My passion was the state of Tennessee and impacting agriculture in that way. But as I thought about it a little bit more, it was, would I look back on my career with the same enthusiasm that maybe my father had at the conclusion of his career when he retired? And I didn't think that the answer would be yes. I thought that once I got to retirement, decades from now, that I would wish that I had done something different to have a greater impact that tied in with my sense of meaningfulness and purpose. And that's why I decided to go back and get some more education. I was limited with what I was able to do without going back. But as a side note, I think it's really cool when you think about the goals that maybe your parents have. So anybody that's listening that is a parent of a young child, you want your child to excel and maybe carry the baton further than you were able to. And that's what my parents were able to do. My mom was able to get a little bit more education than most in her family. My dad was able to get, he was a first generation college student in his direct line, but then also he got a master's degree as well. And then I have a PhD. But as you think about where you want to be, see who is in your network already that you can ask questions to, that you can get their perspectives on some of these things. A lot of jobs that are going to become available for our students in the next few years don't even exist yet. You think about my role in career development at UT Southern, a lot of campuses didn't have even a career services role for decades. And even those that have, it's still pretty new with the departments that they've created. And what is the purpose of having a department of career development at a university? It's to help students think from day one all the way through graduation. What do I need to do on exploring different careers, making sure I'm in the right major, seeing a little bit about what these jobs are like, dipping a toe in with internships and job shadowing opportunities, and being able to build my resume, cover letter, all of those application documents, and graduate with confidence that I'm doing the right stuff, I'm on the right path, and I can go do these things well. And that's what my mission is every day. So yeah, a unique background of my own, but I wasn't afraid to go back and do things and challenge myself. So that's the biggest thing, is going back as an adult in the work field to graduate school where everybody else was coming straight from undergrad. That was unique.
So so you could have just stopped with a Master of Science in Agriculture Leadership. I mean, that's I would have think that would be enough. That's a lot. But you went ahead and what fed into the decision? First of all, what fed into the decision to get a Doctor of Philosophy in Agriculture Sciences, Education, and Communication? And then secondly, what the heck is that?
Yeah. So much words to have to say there. I was fortunate that, at least at Purdue, once you get to know the acronyms, then you can just call it ASEC. But until then, you have no idea what you're talking about with different things, because it is a mouthful, several words all in a row, some of them long. But essentially what the degree is first is it is a degree within the greater field of agricultural and extension education. So teaching others in a non-formal way, kind of outside of the classroom, general knowledge building, which is a lot of what happens over at Discovery Park, engaging outside of the classroom on things in this world and science and figuring out a little bit more what makes the world move. So that's a little bit of how it goes, is educating the general public, but then also that communication aspect, helping navigate through different changes and challenges within the agricultural industry and helping others make the most out of what they're doing. So that's the core of the degree, but then you get to choose your focus. And I didn't know what my focus would be when I was first starting out. It wasn't until I took a few courses, but you go back just one step, what made me want to do that? So I knew that those degrees existed. And yeah, I could do a lot with a master's, but I knew that students at the undergraduate level at a university were a passion of mine, to get them at that kind of phase of their life, no longer living under mom and daddy's roof and about to go into the real world that can be scary for all of us, helping them develop confidence that they are on the right pathway, helping them to connect with and shake the right hands for their future, was just a passion of mine. And I knew that if I wanted to do that at the university level, that I would be hindered if I did not continue on with a little bit more education, giving me the ability to fit in with the mold of what is needed through the educational ranks. So you're somewhat limited in academia at the university level by your education. There's some degrees that you cannot teach with if you don't have a certain number of courses at the master's level that you learn from. And then beyond that at the PhD level, and then there's certain positions that it's going to be difficult to attain in administration, on and on. I could bore you all day with some of that stuff. But I knew that for my future, the best bet was to go and get more education to fill the gaps on what I already knew and what I didn't know. I had the greatest benefit of working with some of the greatest people at Purdue that invested in me, that helped me become who I needed to be. One of my favorite mentoring experiences was by my major professor, Dr. Levon Esters, who's now at Penn State University in a very unique role up there. But what he made all of us as his advisees do, day one, I'm brand new to Indiana. I don't know half the stuff that's going on in this new town. He required us at the meetings that we would have with him regularly to show up with 2 printed off job postings that currently existed in the world. Dr. Esters, why do I care? I'm not even going to graduate for years. Why do I need to know about job postings? And he would come with a highlighter and a red pen, and we'd sit together in those meetings, and we would highlight all of the job description items that are required versus preferred, and seeing all the stuff that it's saying for this dream job that I want after graduation. And then he'd get that red pen out, and he'd show us where our gaps were. You don't have this. You would need this experience, but you don't have it right now. Look at this certification that would be required. Have you worked on trying to get that certification? And then he'd send us on our way. And then we had to come to the next meeting with other job postings that exist in the world. But I tell you what, years later, when I was in the job hunt, I felt like I was very confident in that because I had already explored different careers. I knew a little bit about what I did and didn't want to do after graduation. And then I also was able to have confidence in saying, look at all these requirements that they have. Can check off every one of those boxes. And the boxes that I'm not quite as confident in, I bet I could talk about other transferable skills that I have that are almost as good. And so I think that's a really great aspect of this. Some of that mentorship that he had and the courses I took, I focused a little bit more on industrial organizational psychology, which is more about the math and science of how we work in our jobs, how we get connected with the community where we're working, how we get connected with the workplace that we're in and the function of our job as well. And that's really how it all tied together for me.
Excellent. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, I'm interested in diving into leadership a little bit more, because I know that's an area that you work in quite heavily. So we're going to take a break, and then we'll be right back.
First Choice Farm and Lawn is proud to serve our community. With their exceptional customer service, certified technicians, and a knowledgeable staff, they're sure to take care of all your outdoor lawn care needs. Visit them at 1800 West Reelfoot Avenue in Union City, or at any of their other locations in Tennessee, Kentucky, and Arkansas. For more information, visit firstchoicekubota.com or find them on Facebook. I don't mean to backtrack with all the great success we've talked about with where you are today, but I kind of connected with you when you followed your dad's footsteps in insurance. I did the same thing as well. My dad is a sales manager for Woodman Life. I only sold life insurance. I was wondering what kind of insurance you sold, how many years you did that, and what just made you decide that you didn't want to take that path.
Yeah, that's such a great question. So it's similar. We sold auto, home, and life, and it was something that my dad had done, like I said, for 37 years before he retired. And I knew all about the business growing up because that's where he worked my entire childhood. We'd interact with Farm Bureau for other events. The American Farm Bureau Federation, as a side note, and the Tennessee Farm Bureau, they work together with farming communities in each of our 95 counties in the agricultural production that's happening. And then in those 95 counties, there is a Farm Bureau insurance that began back several decades ago in the early 1900s to help farmers have a voice in the community, but also to insure some of their high-risk products. And now there's no requirement on whether you need to be a farmer or not. But I really enjoyed all the interactions that I got to have with Farm Bureau and the great folks that I got to know growing up. And yes, I was selling life insurance was the main focus of what I was doing, but also sold auto and home products. And just building relationships with customers was a lot of fun. Being able to manage kind of my own portfolio of business and get out in the community, put a face with a name as I was new and starting out was great. And it was a promising career. I did that for almost 3 years before I left to go back to get a PhD at Purdue. But some of the disconnect that I didn't really consider, because it's what my dad had done forever, was, is it what I enjoy? Is it something that I want to do forever? Because my dad and I are very similar, but we do have a little bit different personalities. Whereas he sees student development as a side hobby where he'll work in the community and at church and other things, I see it as something that just drives my everyday and something that I want to spend all my time on, whereas he'll spend his free time on that. And I hadn't really considered some of that balance of trying to sell products on a daily basis, trying to cold call people when you need to get your numbers up and all of that. It was kind of blinded by just the ease of my dad doing it for so many years and coming in and not considering, is that what I want to do? Is that what Stephen's passion is? Mm-hmm. And I struggled with that.
Now, you saw Zach's kiddo a while ago. Zach's already teaching his son how to do podcasts and how to do marketing and social media and PR. Do you have any kids?
I do. We have a daughter named Heidi who's 1.5 years old, and she's a ton of fun.
And so Heidi, I'm hoping that you're already sort of letting her play with trucks and tractors and getting her in the ag frame of mind, because then you could have 3 generations of, FFA. So let's talk a little bit about leadership, because, before I moved here, and I tell you what, here's another great example of what younger folks think about agriculture. we did a survey here. I tell you what, we're going to put a little clip in here. We did a survey with some young kids, a little focus group where we ask them, describe a farmer and would you want to be, in agriculture. So here's how people think. Here's how young people think of agriculture.
They usually wear overalls and boots so they don't get stepped on by the animals.
A farmer likes to feed cows. Some things that goes around his arms that are like pants. Overalls. Yeah, overalls and a shirt.
He drives a tractor.
A farmer is somebody that grows all the crops and take care of the animals so that we have food to eat.
So as you heard, when people think of agriculture and farming, they think of boots, hats, tractors, dirt. They don't really think about all the skills that go into the agriculture as a business. So what are some of the tips you can give people listening who are future leaders on leadership in general and what they should be doing now? Let's say they're in high school or college or even young adults. What should they be doing to develop themselves as future leaders?
Such a great question is really what drives a lot of the passion that I have for everything. So any listener who is a parent of a young child that you want to be successful and you want them to be a leader, the younger, the better on all this. It's not too late because I also dive into what you do on into adulthood, but the younger, the better, because first and foremost, communication is key and you don't want to be locked out. It is so important to be able to communicate your ideas effectively, to learn from one another, to not be afraid to ask questions when your mind is jumbled a little bit on connecting the dots on abstract ideas and thoughts. But what we all get a challenge of is communicating to the general public and public speaking. Most people are scared to death of having to get in front of any type of audience, no matter the size, to talk about some of these things. I've met people that are scared to death of large crowds, and so they would only rather talk to smaller crowds. And I've met people that would be much more excited to get in front of a big group as long as they don't have to talk one-on-one with smaller groups where they get really nervous and back into a corner. The younger that you can master that, the easier it will be for you. So it's not too late, like I said, but if you're trying to encourage your children, make them go network when you're bring them to different events. If you have a friend that's also at an event, say, hey, go talk to Mr. Jerry real quick. And as scared as they are, make them do it. Help them to work through their inner fear so that they develop confidence and they know how to network in an audience. Encourage them to participate in events at school where they need to speak in front of the class, and work on that at home. Practice makes perfect on these types of things. I know a lot of this sounds like communication training and not leadership training, but let me tell you, some of the greatest things that you can do as a leader is communicating your ideas effectively. If you're the leader of a group, if you're the boss of a team, they want to know that you can talk to them about your ideas, that you can go through a game plan, and that you can understand their different communication types and how they want to be responded to. And as you are thinking about how you should operate in some of these things, another key point that a lot of people don't think about, because they see different leaders that are just so transformational and do such a good job, they're like, this person's just a born leader. They are just so good at this. It's just innate. They came out of the womb ready to be a leader.
My friend Keith Carver comes to mind.
Keith Carver is a great example. And yeah, so he is a wonderful gentleman. Got to see him just a few days ago, and I'm going to get to see him next week. But
Tell him
he's
I
a great
said
example. Hi. I sure will. As you think about people like Keith Carver, he would also tell you some of these things about your background, your growing up, the times you had to come out of your shell, and the times that you had to own up when you didn't know something. He's someone who became an excellent leader, even though a lot of people are like, wow, what an amazing and transformational guy. And so I challenge you, no matter what stage of life that you're in, remember that people don't really think through what leadership means. They assume that it's people who do extraordinary things. But it's really, leaders are ones who get others to do extraordinary things. It's ones who can see that vision through your potential and get you there. and being able to see the value that others bring to the table and work together as a team, it's a lot more about how you interact with one another, how you help others to be successful, and how you're bold enough. That's why I encourage the listeners that if you can make your kids get out of their comfort zone and do the scary things, because a lot of times leadership is about putting an idea on your back and climbing up that mountain that nobody else has gone up before. Meaning, if you have an idea and you have that vision, what's it going to take to get that to happen? Are you just going to rely on others that you tell to do it? Or are you going to demonstrate how to do that? Are you going to model the way through that? Are you going to inspire a shared vision? Are you going to challenge the process? Are you going to encourage the heart? Are you going to enable others to act? Those types of things are the vision that is required and the evidence of a true leader. And anybody can do it. We just get in our heads all the time that only some people are good at it and others aren't.
Yeah, I have 2 adult daughters, and the two they're both working in great jobs that they love. And the 2 things I tell them is, bosses love it if you say, I don't really understand. What are you saying? What do you want me to do? Ask for clarity. I love it when people ask for clarity. And then the other thing is quickly, Zach's writing that down, quickly admit it when you make a mistake and say, you know what? I made a mistake. I screwed up. I so much appreciate that more than someone who makes 1,000 excuses. It's just owning it. I would say I've never been too harsh. Have I, Zach?
No. Great boss.
See, there you go. No pressure at all. So this has been so enlightening. As we close out, what advice do you provide young folks who are coming into the UT program there and trying to decide what direction they want to head, with their life? Do you have a magic bullet?
I sure do. I think whenever I meet with brand new freshmen, for instance, or transfer students, or whoever's coming to campus for the first time to get to meet me, one of the first things that we do is we identify who we are through self-discovery. I challenge them to think through, what are your interests? What do you value? Not mom and daddy. What do you value? What is your personality? What things do you like in a workplace preference? Are you someone who wants to be on a team where everybody interacts all day long? Are you somebody who wants to be individualized and be given tasks that you go and do independently? Identifying some of these things about your interest, about your personality, about how you want to interact in the workplace, and tying that all again with your values helps you to see what careers exist that line up on that list. So we take some assessments. I take those results from the assessments, and then we put them into some of the career opportunity data. So that is some of the data that is put out there by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, others that exist based on different majors and career fields. I help students to have a little bit of homework and explore the plethora of careers that exist that line right in with who they are. And oftentimes you'll have students that are like, well, I've never even heard of this career before. Well, do some homework. Here's the things that I challenge you with as you do your homework. What type of job would this be? Where would it be? What things do you not know about this? And then after that, as we have that list of questions, let's get you connected in with somebody who's doing it today, and have that little networking and mentoring session with them, reaching out, because people love to talk about their pathways and their backgrounds and stuff. So connecting them with a stronger network to just go have a conversation with this someone, even if it's just over the phone is the only ability that you're able to do if you're coast to coast, or if you're able to go and have lunch with this person, pick their brain. What pathway did they take to get this career? What advice would they give to you on things that you should be doing right now to be successful? So as I help students through that, then very early on, they have confidence that they're headed in the right direction. They're doing the right things. They are in the right major. Then as they go on, I ask them to connect with internship opportunities and job shadowing opportunities. Go dip a toe in on this actual work. Is it something you actually can see yourself enjoying? Or did that internship experience turn into something you're like, oh goodness, I'm glad I'm not doing that full time because I would hate that job. That's good to know, rather than diving in headstrong on a career that you aren't sure about. So helping them to gain some of that confidence. And then we also help them with the little things like paying attention to detail and putting everything together with your resume, your cover letter, all other application materials that might be required so that you can enter that job hunt with confidence, knowing that you're the ideal candidate that they're looking for. So it's all about that transformational student experience and helping them to succeed in and outside of the classroom and be ready for life after graduation.
Man, fantastic. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your morning and hanging out with us this morning.
Been a lot of fun. Thank y'all for having me.
And thanks to all you listeners who've joined us today at Discovery Park of America. Shout out to our friends over at First Choice Farm and Lawn for sponsoring today's episode. Our mission here is to inspire children and adults to see beyond. To plan an experience here for you and your family, visit discoveryparkofamerica.com.